vous offre plus de 4000 chaînes de télévision. Les chaînes européennes, les chaînes américaines, les chaînes asiatiques, les chaînes africaines. À un prix imbattable. À un prix imbattable. Tenez-vous bien. $185 pour 12 mois, inclus le box. Alors, où est-ce que vous pouvez trouver mieux que ça? Si ce n'est pas sur Tempo Afrique TV. Mesdames, messieurs, appelez seulement le 612 804 0295 et vous serez servi. Vous serez agréablement surpris de voir plus de 4000 chaînes de télévision rouler sur votre écran comme ça et vous choisissez laquelle vous voulez. Alors mesdames, n'hésitez pas. N'hésitez surtout pas et ne faites pas compter. Prenez votre téléphone, prenez-le tout de suite et appelez le 612, le 804, le 02 95. Nous sommes là, ici à Tempo TV, pour rendre votre vie simple et agréable. Alors, saisissez l'occasion d'or. $185 pour toute une année, pour 12 mois, inclus le box. Quoi de mieux que ça?
My whole life, my father told me stories about moving to the United States. He would tell me that his brother, my Uncle George, was already living here and let my father stay with him for a while. Through my Uncle George, my father was introduced to our cultural organization here in America, who helped him make connections, apply for college, find his first job, and adjust to life in a completely different culture than he was used to. The Cultural Association helped him get started on his new life. My Uncle George would bring my father with him to the annual Summer Cultural Groups Festival, and later, he would bring me. It was incredible to see so many people of all ages laughing and celebrating with food and song and dance. It brought back the best feelings of home and gave my father the opportunity to pass his culture, language, and values on to me. My father and Uncle George were very close, so when George died last year, my father wanted to honor his wishes to be buried with a traditional ceremony back at his birthplace. My father told me that because Uncle George had cultural group life insurance, he was able to afford to bring George home and have the traditional burial George wanted. Though my father had been able to honor my Uncle George's wishes, it got me thinking about my own family. One day, I'd have to make the same arrangements for my own parents and my wife's parents as well. Of course, we would want to bring them home and honor their wishes, but it would be a financial hardship for our family. There were a lot of things to think about, even though I really didn't want to think about them at all. When my father told me about cultural group life insurance, he told me it's intended to help families when they need it the most. It's not tied to an employer, so no matter where my career takes me, I'll always have coverage. The more people who participate and the younger they are, the more it helps keep the insurance premiums down for the entire association. Because my parents have cultural group term life insurance, there will be money available to help me provide the kind of service I want to give my parents. And by joining, I can put my mind at ease and continue to celebrate our traditions into the future. With cultural group life insurance, I can worry less and spend more of my time celebrating with the people who matter most to me.
Hello everyone, welcome to Premium Law Access. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Uche Nwaneri, attorney and co-founder of Premium Law Firm. Today I'm going to be talking to you about tips for completing Form I-485. If you do have questions, please let me know, and you feel free to contact me at 713-730-2900. Whatever I'll be sharing with you today will be for informational purposes only. It will not be any form of legal advice. So if you need any legal advice, please contact me directly. So without further ado, I'll get into our topic for today. So what is a Form I-485? Form I-485 is an application to register permanent residence or to adjust status, but it's popularly known as the green card. It's an application for a green card, and you have to be in the United States to be able to use that form or to be able to file that with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. So if you are not in the United States, then you cannot use I-485. You can still apply for a green card, but then it will still have to be through the consular processing. But for the purpose of today's episode, we'll be focusing on the Form I-485. So who can apply for who can use that form, the Form I-485? You have to be the principal applicant or a derivative applicant, which means a spouse or child of the principal applicant. So in order for you to apply using the Form I-485 to apply for a green card, you have to fit into one of the eligibility categories. So now there are so many eligibility categories, but you have to fit into at least one of them. If you don't fit into any of them, then maybe Form I-485 may not be the ideal form for you, or you may not be eligible to apply for a green card. So I'm going to share with you the common eligibility categories that most people encounter during the applications. So the first will be, if you're filing a family petition, it will be as an immediate relative or a preference category where you have to wait for a visa number, or a fiancé, or a widow or widower of a United States citizen. Another eligibility category could be based on employment, where your employer will have to file for you. And another one will be where you're already an asylee or you're already a refugee. You can also be a victim of abuse or a victim of a criminal activity or human trafficking. You can also be a selectee of the diversity visa lottery. So these are just a few of them. There's just so many, but you have to look closely to know where you fit in. If you don't fit into any of them, then no, don't use the Form I-485. So having said that, you're going to say, who is not eligible? Sometimes you're going to wonder, is everybody going to be eligible to use that form? No. First off, if you don't find yourself, if you don't fit into any of the eligibility categories, then you can't use that form. Also, you may not be eligible to file for a green card in some scenarios, and I'm going to list a few of those scenarios. One is if you have a criminal activity. Two is if you have accrued unlawful presence. Maybe you have overstayed your visa. Three is when you have come in here, enter the country without a visa. You were not admitted or you were not inspected at the port of entry. The other scenario would be where you may have worked without authorization and where you have failed to maintain the terms of your visa status. So if you had come in as a visitor and you have failed to maintain that status. So those may be bars for you to apply for adjustment of status or for a green card. However, there might be exemptions even when you may not be eligible. And it's if you fall into any of these categories. If you're an immediate relative, you may still be exempted from that bar, the adjustment bar. If you're also a victim of abuse, and usually when you have filed a VAWA application, it's called the Violence Against Women's Act applicants. So in those scenarios, even though you may not be eligible for a green card, you may be exempted in those kind of scenarios. So now I'm going to talk to you about how the Form I-485 is filed. So in order to file a Form I-485, you have to have an immigrant petition. And the immigrant petition could be an I-130, where you're filing a petition for alien relative. It could be a Form I-140, where your employer is filing for you. It could be a Form I-730, where you're filing as a refugee, or a Form I-589, where you're filing as an asylee. So in those scenarios, you have to have an immigrant petition to file along with the Form I-485. So as far as filing, there are two instances where you can file. One is you can file those immigrant petitions along with the Form I-485, which is the concurrent filing. Or you'll have to file the immigrant petition first, wait for it to be approved before you can now file for the Form I-485. So it's always best to contact an attorney to figure out which strategy will work best in your scenario. So now to the tips of filing a Form I-485. So the first tip is, if you are filing a Form I-485, would be to make sure you're using the correct form. So USCIS, they change their forms periodically. So you'd always want to make sure you're using the most updated form. Secondly, you'd want to make sure that you're answering all the questions. There are lots of questions. It's a 20-page form. So you want to make sure you're answering all the questions. You'd want to make sure that the answers you're giving are accurate and they're also consistent. You also want to make sure that if you're handwriting your answers, make sure your writing is legible and use a black ink. So you don't want immigration trying to figure out what you're writing. Make sure you write it out neatly. That's if you have to write. Otherwise, you can type everything in. You can also make sure that you're paying the right fees, the correct fees, before mailing your form. And most importantly, watch out for keywords like ever, all, and any. When those questions are being asked, make sure you're answering them completely and accurately. And lastly, before you mail your form, make a copy of that form before you mail that to immigration. So that's those are the tips I'll be sharing with you. And this time I'm going to be discussing the form itself. So like I said earlier, the form is a 20-page form. Lots of information is required. It is divided into 13 parts. And if you're using an attorney, the attorney is going to complete the part before part 1. So part 1 is for the principal applicant. That's you, and you're also the beneficiary. So you will have to fill your information in part 1. In part 2, it has the applicant and then your filing category. And that's what we're talking about, those eligibility categories. So you have to figure out where you fit in. Part 3 will be additional information about the principal applicant or beneficiary. That's you. Part 4 It's going to be information about the applicant's parents. That's your parents. Part 5 is information about your marital history. So if you've had previous marriages, if you've had divorces, make sure that you are putting everything down. Part 6, and I want you to note this, it's information about all your living children, which comprise of your biological children, your adopted children, your stepchildren, your married children, children living with you or not, children born out of wedlock, and listen to this one, missing children. So when you look at that, when you hear that word all, it's everyone, all your children. Part 7 is the biographic information. Part 8 is grounds of eligibility and inadmissibility. Now in this section, you have 80 questions, and you have the yes and no answers. So read them carefully before you answer. And it will comprise of the security questions, criminal acts, public charge, removal, unlawful presence, illegal entry, and other conduct. So read those, and especially those with criminal acts. Some people will say, oh, I got a ticket and I didn't think I could include it. And some will say, oh, I got an offense, I was never arrested, and all of that. It's always best to consult an attorney if you are in doubt. Part 9 is accommodations for those with disability. Part 10 is the applicant's statement and the certification as well as your signature. Part 11 is the interpreter's information. Part 12 is information about the person preparing the form, and this could be your attorney, or if you're filing it yourself, then it will be yourself. Then part 13 is the last part. Part 13 is where you don't have to sign. This is where you're going to sign at the interview. So you're going to answer every question from parts 1 to part 12 except part 13. Part 13 will be done at the interview. So that's all about the form I-485, and I have received some questions about the form 485, and I will be willing to share those answers or discuss those questions with you. So the first question is, can I work after filing my form I-485? And the answer is, it depends. Form I-485 in itself does not give you authorization to work. You may only be able to work if you filed your form I-485 with another form, which is the Employment Authorization Application. That's the form I-765. So if you file that along with your form I-485 and that is approved, then you may be eligible to work. The second question is, if there is an emergency, can I travel outside the United States while my application is pending? So for this, you always make sure that you're asking an attorney before you travel. So the answer is, if you travel, if you have to travel or you have an urgent need to travel, don't do so unless you have a document called the advance parole. So you must have applied for that and have that approved in order for you to travel while your application is pending. If you don't have that, please don't travel. And if you do travel, then it means you're abandoning your application. You don't want to risk that. The next question is, can I include my children as part of my application? And the answer is yes, your children will be part of your application. You're going to list your children. But if this question means, does it mean if I apply for a green card or apply the form I-485, does it mean a green card will also be given to, or issued to my children? And the answer is no. Your children will have to file their own application, and they are the derivative applicants. So they're going to derive from your own application, but they each will have their own separate applications. The next question is, what is the next step after filing my Form I-485? So after filing your Form I-485, if you filed your Form I-765, the employment authorization application along with that, then you have to wait because you will receive another notice to do your biometrics, and that's your fingerprint. So after you've done your fingerprint, you will now receive your work authorization. That's employment authorization document. And after that, you will now wait to be scheduled for an interview. The next question I have will be, can I file Form I-485 if I did not enter the United States with a visa? And the answer to this will be, it depends. Mostly, if you did not enter the United States with a visa, you may not be allowed to adjust in the United States. You can still get a green card, but you have to get that green card from the embassy in your country. But there are some scenarios where you'll still be able to file the I-485. And for this, I'll ask you to contact an attorney to be able to give you more details on how this is done. So how long does it take to process my Form I-485? This will depend on where you're filing from, because each service area has their own processing times. So when you file your Form I-485, you'd want to know the estimated time going to the USCIS website, and you're going to look at the processing times. That will give you an estimated time of when your application will be processed or how long it will process. But for most times, it's usually over a year, sometimes over 18 months. It just depends on your locality and where you're filing from. And the last question I'm going to share with you will be, are there options if my Form I-485 is denied? And the answer to that will be, yes, there may be options, but that's something you'd have to discuss with your attorney to be able to figure out what the best strategy is. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope you found this helpful, and I will tell you to please send me your comments, send me your feedback. I really would appreciate that. And if there are topics that you'd like me to discuss, feel free to share that in your comments. And most importantly, share this information with others who might need this information. We'll be able to help you with your immigration needs. And I wouldn't fail to ask you to please always subscribe to Tempo Afrique. And without further ado, thank you for tuning in and hope to see you next week. Bye.